Welcome everybody, it's Blood Scythe 2, and this is a little series I've decided to do in tandem with my Week of series, where I take the time to kind of bring you guys my opinions and thoughts and just like a little bit of help or tips on gods that I may have done for my Week of series. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started with Ah-Muzen-Cab, the God of Bees. Let's start by taking a look at Ah-Muzen-Cab's abilities. Hive. Bees swarm at the ground target location, creating a new hive that provides movement and attack speed buffs to Ah-Muzen-Cab. He also heals for a small amount every second while he remains close to the hives. The hives can only be destroyed by basic attacks, maximum 6 hives. Swarm. Ah-Muzen-Cab summons a large swarm of bees that fly forward in a path in front of him, dealing damage to all enemies hit and applying bees to them. Honey. Ah-Muzen-Cab sprays honey at a movable ground target location, slowing all enemies in the area. Bees from hives within 55 feet and swarm will fly over to protect the honey, dealing damage every 0.5 second and applying bees to all enemies as they leave the honey. Stinger. Ah-Muzen-Cab fires off an enormous stinger that deals damage to all enemies on a line, sticking into the first god that is hit, applying bees, and crippling them for 3 seconds. If the target dies, or after 3 seconds the stinger falls onto the ground for 4 seconds. If Ah-Muzen-Cab picks up his stinger, he gains significant cooldown reduction. Bees. This is his passive. Enemies afflicted by bees take damage every 0.5 seconds for 3 seconds, and are revealed on the minimap. Bees will also attack any nearby enemies that aren't already affected by the bees. Now I'd like to go over my preferred build. It's not the only way you can build him. This is more geared towards arena, but can be applied in other game modes. Now this is the typical build that I take 9 times out of 10. I'm not going to go into extreme detail into these items or over why I pick them. If you do want to know any of that in more detail, feel free to ask me down in the comments below, and I'll be sure to answer that for you. Aside from that, if you want to know what any specific item does, I did kind of play this clip a little slower so you can kind of pause, stop, read, kind of go over it. Now, as I said before, this is more of an arena build. It focuses more on obviously physical attack power, attack speed, crit, lifesteal, kind of in that order of importance. The only things I would really change, in my opinion, if I were to take this build into a more strategic or goal-oriented game like Joust or Conquest, is I would either switch out either the Quinn size or the Aussie for Devourer's Gauntlets, and probably take that before Executioner, because that early lifesteal really helps out in those game modes. On top of that too, Quinn size is kind of a more specific item. It is really good at taking down tankier characters. But be sure to let me know down in the comments below. Like I said, if you do something different or something you don't agree with, just let me know below, and I'd really appreciate it. Now, the biggest tip I could give you for playing Ah-Muzen-Cab is really just to utilize his range. He's one of those gods to where he's not very strong early game, but come to mid-late game, he really starts to pick up. Now with him being unable to really secure kills early on, it's really important that you learn how to play him passively and safely. With that being said, utilize his range. He outranges a good bit of the other gods in the game from what I've seen, and as far as hunters go, his range is really good. So utilize those basics, utilize that range, and if anything, utilize his passive. Those bees, they don't do a whole lot of damage, but it's enough to where if you keep applying it and you keep the pressure up, it adds up. Keep an eye out for that, any opportunity you have to apply your passive. With that being said too, he's a very synergetic god. All of his abilities have some form of synergy, some way that you can use them in tandem. So keep in mind what abilities work in what order and what abilities apply his passive. Because like I said, those bees are very important early game. Making sure you keep your hives up is really important too. It lets you place a max of 6 hives, and these hives, the passive they give you is very good. Of course, like I said, once you get to mid-late game, your build makes up for whatever that passive could have provided, but it still adds on to your overall lethalness come that portion of the game. So with these hives, the biggest thing is placement, location. Make sure that you put them in a place to where they can't be easily destroyed. They do, in fact, take a basic attack to destroy them. So put them in a place where it's inconvenient for your opponent to come and take them down. Like I said, be aware of where they are. Keep yourself around them. They give very little healing, but it's healing nonetheless. And like I said, that little passive that it provides really allows you to bridge the gap with your attack speed early on in the game until you can get it built up, with your executioner and your Quinn size or whatever the case may be, whatever it is that you are building. Now, Honey is his B attack, if you keep the default settings, is really his bread and butter. And I say that because it's such a good ability. Once you get used to being able to control it with the telegraph, as long as there is a hive within range, it doesn't matter where you start shooting it. As long as you pull that ability across any range of one of your hives, it will apply bees. And that's a really big thing too. And on top of that, not only is it applying this damage over time, but it's also applying a slow. And it really makes it possible for you to tack on damage with that slow. This is actually one of the abilities that I max every time I play him, because that honey is just really, really important. And as far as using that honey, keep in mind, if you place the honey down and you don't have a hive in range, you can always throw your A or your hive, or swarm rather, over the honey, and it will activate bees just the same. Now, going into mid to late game, if you build him the way that I build him, you're doing damage. You're doing enough damage to where applying your bees really isn't as important, but it helps. You apply your passive, you cycle through your abilities, and then you just blow them away with your range and your attack speed and that crit. And once you can do that and you learn how to kind of float like a bee, you could say, on the outside of these battles and on the outside of these confrontations, he's really, really a good god to really dish out damage with. And I will go ahead and say that he does take a little learning. He has a rather steep learning curve, learning to use his abilities, learning to use them in tandem, learning to keep yourself at a safe distance to play him properly, and learning where to put hives and how to use them effectively. All of these things are very, very important to learning, into learning how to play this god. And I've noticed it's very rewarding once you figure it out, because when I first tried him, he wasn't my favorite. He just wasn't my favorite at all. But he grew on me, and I really enjoy playing him. Now, the biggest thing is don't always chase your ult. It does give cooldown reduction if you're able to pick up your stinger after it's expired and fallen off whoever you've hit. But dying isn't worth losing, getting that 80% cooldown reduction. Now, yes, 80% cooldown reduction is a lot. So if you can get that stinger, get it. Get it every time, unless it's going to put you in danger, because a death is not worth cooldown reduction. Other than that, the biggest thing I could really say outside of the things that I've already covered is learn his abilities, learn how they work, learn the scaling, and just really understand his abilities. Because, for instance, his A, his swarm, and his Y, his ultimate, the stinger, both of these abilities actually have piercing properties. So your swarm will go through every enemy it possibly hits until it reaches its max range, and it will apply your bees. And this includes piercing through a wall. Yes, you can use his swarm through a solid wall and apply your bees. Now, the stinger will also go through a wall, but the thing with using his stinger is it will pierce to a certain extent up to the max range. It will pierce through minions, because it doesn't affect minions, but it will stop at the first enemy god that it hit. And the last little tidbit, when we were going over his passive earlier, it did say that the bees will jump from enemy to enemy if the enemy in range is not affected by the bees. Now, this is true, but the only thing to remember is that these bees will not cross from a minion to an enemy god, or an enemy god to a minion. It will only cross from a minion to a minion, or a god from a god. So that's kind of things to kind of keep in mind. So you really can't put your bees on a minion and hope that it hits your enemy, your enemy players, or whatever the case may be, or vice versa. Now, off the top of my head, those are really the big things to really kind of give you the gist of how to play him. These aren't all of the things to keep in mind, and these aren't the only things to keep in mind when playing Ah-Muzen-Cab, but these are some of the key tidbits that I found important when it came to kind of getting over that learning curve and using him effectively.